Hi everybody, it's Julie and welcome to Hello Monday. Today in the studio I am super stoked over how this card turned out. I think it's absolutely stunning. And this technique I've seen before on other projects, but I have no idea what it's called, so I couldn't search for it and get any results that actually showed me the steps involved, so I kind of had to figure it out on my own. So bear with me, there's probably easier ways to do it, but this is the way I could get it to work consistently every time. You're going to need a stamp positioning tool, and for me, the Stamp-A-Majig is the best. The imaging plate is not part of the packaging, so don't throw it away. It has a matte finish and a glossy side, so we're going to be stamping on the matte side. That's going to grip the ink to the surface very easily. And you can see that the tool it can go right-handed or left-handed, and I like to use it with my left hand, and I'm going to go ahead and use it down below because it's easier for me to see on camera from that position. And so I'm going to go ahead and nest the imaging plate flush into the corner there, and then I'm going to nest the stamp flush into the corner and go ahead and go straight down right onto the imaging plate. So this will give me an idea of where that bird is going to go every time I need to position it somewhere. And I'm also working with the Hero Arts tea flower. I love the way these botanical images look, the vintage engraving style. I just think they're so classy. And I'm also using really awesome color. I'm not even a fan of purple, but I love how these ink colors work together. And I'm using my flower upside down, and you'll see why in a little bit. Now, the next thing I need to do is to take the dimensions of my card and trace an outline onto some scratch paper. I found that if I made a template, it was a lot easier for me to figure out where I wanted things to go and keep track of that. So I'm going to trace an A2 card front there onto my scratch paper. And I've also die cut a label. And this is going to be a template, so it's just going to be a piece of scratch cardstock that I'm using. And the only reason I need it is just to figure out where I want to trace it onto my card front, because that's where it's going to end up being on the final finished card. So we'll get that traced very quickly, and then you can save that, and reuse it. And there are lots of dies that you could use. I had to kind of play around with the shape and size of the die and make sure that it matched the dimensions of the bird and the card front, and everything would go into place correctly before I got to this point. So now I'm going to take a clean die cut label, and I'm going to temporarily mount that within that framework there on my template. And this is going to help guide me as I'm building the card. And like I said, there are probably other ways to do this. This is just the way that worked for me. And now I can take my imaging plate and I can play around with where I want that bird to show up. And once I'm happy with it, I can go ahead and bring that positioning tool back in and nest it, butt it right up into the corner there with the imaging plate. And then I can take my bird and re-ink him. I'm using grape juice. I don't even like purple, but I love this color of ink. And I've removed the imaging plate at this point because I don't need it now once I've got my tool in place. So now I can remove that, and you can see that's where that bird is going to land on the label and on the card front. And now as I'm working with the tea flower, you can see that it's upside down. And the reason I did that was because I knew it was going to go in different positions. So I can actually get a visual idea of where that's going to go without having to twist my arm all around like crazy. And I'm going to position that in the same way that I did the bird. I'll just remove that imaging plate. I've got to make sure that that tool doesn't shift, or I'm going to have issues later on. So it has to remain in place. And that's key to getting the placement of all of this correctly. So now I've got my flower stamped. There we go. And you'll see where it's going to bleed off onto the card. And I wanted to put one right here down in the left side there. So I'm kind of getting an idea. Yep, that's where I want it to go. And I'd have to do some crazy gymnastics to be able to stamp it in that position because I'm right-handed. So I find it easier to rotate my template or my project and then work sometimes with an image upside down. I know I'm kind of weird that way, but hey, it works for me, so. So now I have to remember that I have to hold and ink my stamp up upside down to make sure that I stamp it into place upside down. So when I first started, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. So these are just things you have to be mindful of as you're working on something like this at different angles. So upside down it goes, flush into the corner, and then we'll have it there in that lower left corner. See? Perfect. And there you can see when I rotate it. Now I need to remove that label, and I'll take the adhesive off the back of it too because I don't want it to end up getting onto my card front, and I'll explain why later. So now I need to add the card base, and I'm going to, again, temporarily mount it right there into place within that square that I traced previously. And then I can go ahead and take my imaging plate and stamp the flower. So I'm going to rotate that imaging plate so I can get my flower lined up. And you can see where the bleed off on that scratch paper is helping guide me to get it in the right position. And then I can butt my tool right back there into the corner, make sure I've got it positioned correctly, and then I'm going to grab my stamp, make sure that I'm using it upside down and that the tool doesn't shift, remove the imaging plate, and then come back in and stamp my flower straight down. Perfect, see? And then I'm going to rotate it and I'm going to repeat the same thing. I just want to make sure that that card doesn't shift out of place, make sure it stays where it's supposed to be, and then ink up my stamp, get my tool back in place, lining it up over the bleed off there. This takes me a little bit of time because I'm kind of a slow and methodical stamper, so I had to speed up the camera for you to see me do this, because otherwise it's kind of painful for me to watch it because I'm so slow. So now we'll get that in place. That's perfect. And then we can move on. So there's one more thing to do to complete the label part. So you can see that's where that's going to go. Isn't that perfect? So we want to have the tail of the bird bleeding off onto the card front. So I'm going to put that label right there, and I don't have any adhesive on it. I took the adhesive off the back of that label because I knew eventually I was going to need to lift it off that card front. So I'm going to anchor that imaging plate with my right hand to make sure it doesn't budge, and I'm going to very carefully remove that label. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my positioning tool and bring it back in where I need it to be. See? There we go. And I could have done that, I suppose, with the label, but I had a heck of a time keeping everything in place because I was working with more than one image and more than one ink color. And I suppose if you simplified it, which of course, sometimes I make things harder than I need to, I guess. You wouldn't have needed the scratch paper, but I found that this is the look I wanted, and so this was the only way I could figure out how to get it. So now I've got my bird in place, and then I decided, okay, now I can go ahead and trim it down because none of this is going to end up landing on the actual base card itself. I just wanted to create a mat, and this is going to go on top of the card base. So I also need to get a greeting on there, and that's better done before I mount it to the card front, just in case I decide to pop it up. So I went ahead and stamped the greeting onto the imaging plate with the tool, and then now I'm going to come back in with the gorgeous, gorgeous grape juice ink and get that sentiment stamped in there. I love the font work on that. I think it goes beautifully with the bird and the flower. I just love how the whole thing looks. It's so classy. So now we'll go ahead. I decided to go ahead and flush mount that to the card base because I wanted to 3D mount the label. And this is what creates that super cool effect, is you've got to 3D mount the die cut piece. So I'm just going to peel off the liner papers on the center foam pieces. And this way, this is a trick I learned from my friend Sherry Carroll, who is so talented and brilliant. And what she does is she just takes it off the center pieces because then she can kind of position it, tack it down just gently. And then once she knows for sure she's got it on there straight and it's not crooked, then she can come around to the outer edges and corners and remove the liner papers from the rest of those foam dots. And then you can press and cement everything down. And if you had trouble before where it wasn't in the right spot, you could lift it up without destroying the card. Isn't that cool? I just love this effect. I think it is an amazing look and can take an otherwise plain and simple card and just really kick it up a notch. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll try it.